Brothers and sisters, in this world that we live in, right from the time we are born, we suffer from different kinds of sicknesses and diseases. Every one of us must have at least, if you are not having any kind of sickness, at least you must have had a common cold or a fever at some point of time in our life. And many of us, yet are more unfortunate. Maybe we have suffered from diabetes as we grow older. Some people suffer from cancer. And sometimes we find people meeting with accidents, breaking their bones, their legs and hands, and we feel sorry for them, we feel empathy for them, and many of us have pity for them. But brothers and sisters, there are many of us who suffer from mental sicknesses, and we do not feel anything for them. Why? Because, as we say, we believe what we see. Because we cannot see anything, so we feel nothing for them. And when we say mental sicknesses, we do not even speak to our own people in the house. Like husband will not tell his wife, and vice versa, and children will not tell their parents or their siblings. And mental sickness is normally frowned upon and looked down upon. So nobody tends to relate and tell the other person, the next person. And people generally tend to suffer with it. Now, most of us at some point or the other in our life must have suffered from depression, which is very common, anxiety, panic attacks, anxiety attacks. Then there is schizophrenia, there is attention deficiency, and there are so many different kinds. Children suffer from Down syndrome, autism, and I'm not really an expert on mental sickness, so I'm just telling you there are so many different kinds of mental sickness and diseases. And brothers and sisters, many of us tend to call these people mad, whoever suffers from these kind of things. And when depression becomes very severe, and then you have to see a doctor, and then it is known as clinical depression. So many people suffer, and many people suffer silently. But brothers and sisters, today I'm going to share with you and let you know that mental sickness is not something to be frowned upon and to look down upon or to feel ashamed for. Because there were many holy men and women also in the Holy Bible who also went through bouts of depression, anxiety, and all that many of us also might have gone through or might be going through in our lives. Now let me start first off with one of our patriarchs, the great King David, the shepherd, warrior, poet, the King David, whom God said, after my own heart, someone after my own heart, and God openly said that He loves him, and He loved him so much. Even though many people say that he was a sinner, one of the greatest sinners. Now, brothers and sisters, if you see the life of King David was just one of the 8 sons of Jesse. Now, King David plays a very significant role in our Christianity because Jesus comes from the lineage, from the genealogy of King David. Comes from the genealogy of David. Now, if you see the prophecy of Micah, when he prophesies, he says, from you, O Bethlehem of Ephratah. So, King David comes from Ephratah in Bethlehem. Now, he's one of the 8 sons of Jesse. He's one of the 8 sons, and he's the youngest son. And being the youngest son, he doesn't have any relevance in the family. The youngest son is always sent out to look after the sheep, and as a shepherd, he has to go out early in the morning, and he comes back late in the evening. Whole day he's doing nothing but looking after the sheep. So his life is irrelevant to anyone. Nobody cares about him. Nobody bothers about him. But there's someone who loves him, and that is God. You see, when King Saul disobeys God, and Samuel, the prophet Samuel, is very sad and disappointed. And God says to Samuel, will you stay like this, sad and disappointed and depressed? And he says, go to the house of Jesse, and I will show you to anoint a new king. And Samuel goes to the house of Jesse, and all the sons of Jesse are presented before him. And he sees the first one and says, this fellow is very tall and handsome, and surely God must, this one must be the one whom God wants to anoint the king. Then he sees the second one, and the third one. And God says, none of these, because I don't go by looks and appearance. And finally all 7 have gone through, and then he asked him, do you have any more sons? Because Jesse also doesn't think much about David, because he's a younger son and he's a young boy, and he's just a shepherd boy, so nobody thinks much about him. And then he sends for David, and David comes, and the Lord says, this is the one whom my heart is pleased with, and this is the one who will be my king. And Samuel anoints David with the oil, and he's anointed as king. But far from it, brothers and sisters, instead of bringing good in his life, his troubles start from there on. You know that David was renowned as a warrior, and one of the things that made him renowned was, which would put him in the highlight, was in the 17th chapter of the first book of Samuel, where the Israelites are faced with this giant known as Goliath. And Goliath, according to the Bible says in cubits. So when you convert it into feet, he's about 12 feet long, 12 feet high, about 3 meters. He's about 3 meters. So you can imagine how tall he was. And this giant comes and he challenges the Israelites. And the Israelite army is on one side of the mountain, and the Philistines on the other side. And in between, this man comes and he challenges the Israelites. And he says, give me one man from your camp who can fight me. And the Israelites are scared, and because they have no one. Everyone is scared because the entire army is scared of him. And how can one man go and fight this giant? And at that point of time, Jesse sends his son David, because 3 of his brothers are fighting in the army. And he sends with some food to his brothers, and then he goes to his brothers when he gives the food. And he hears the commotion, and he asks the soldiers what's going on. And they tell him that this man, he has challengers, and there's no one who can go and fight him. And he says, they also tell him that the king has said that if any man can go and fight him and defeat him, then he shall make him rich, he shall give his daughter to be his wife, and also he shall make him free, meaning he shall not have to pay any taxes to the king. So he hears what he has to say, and he tells the soldiers, I can go and fight him. And ultimately the word reaches King Saul, and Saul calls him and says, you are going to fight him, you're just a boy. And he said, this man is a seasoned warrior, he has been fighting all his life, since his childhood, and you're just a boy, and how can you fight him? And he says, I do not care because the Lord is with me, he says. I don't get scared of anyone because the Lord is with me, and the Lord will give me in his hands. And King Saul puts on his armor on his head, the entire armor, the coat of arms, and the bronze helmet and everything. And David cannot bear all that because he's not used to all that, and he feels uncomfortable. And he goes facing Goliath only with the staff and with the sling. And he takes 5 smooth stones. And when he goes and faces Goliath, Goliath says, who do you think I am? Do you think I'm a dog? He says. Do you think I'm a dog that you're coming with a stick? He says, I'm going to kill you and keep your body as food for all the animals, the wild animals. And David says, and he curses David in the name of his God. And David says, the Lord my God will give in my hands. And he takes his sling, and he aims the sling, and one smooth stone he aims at his temple. And Goliath is, if you think about it, with one smooth stone, such a giant would not fall down. So the power of God is there in that. And he falls down, and then he takes his own sword, the sword of Goliath, and he kills him. And after that, David becomes renowned, and when they come back from the battle, the women all start singing, and the people start singing, and they say, Samuel has had his thousands, but David has killed 10,000s. So this automatically, it brings up the jealousy in King Saul, and King Saul is jealous of him, and now instead of giving him all that he promised, instead of that, Saul tries to kill him. So instead of bringing great things upon him, more disaster comes upon David, and Saul tries to kill him. And so David has to run away, and David has to hide. And in Psalm chapter 6:6-7, David writes, I am worn out from my groaning. All night long I flood my bed with weeping, and drench my couch with tears. My eyes grow weak with sorrow. They fail because of all my foes. So he cries out to the Lord and he says all these words, brothers and sisters. And brothers and sisters, later on, David is chosen as king, but then he's only made a king of Judah. Again, there is a problem. The rest of Israel does not accept him as king, and then again that leads to fights. Finally, he unites the entire Israel, and then he is anointed the king of entire Israel, the full of Israel. But you see, his life is like full of ups and downs, and everywhere torments and troubles, and so much so that in Psalm 13, verse 2, he says, "How long must I struggle with anguish in my soul, with sorrow in my heart every day?" He says to God. Brothers and sisters, and then we know about many people, there was this priest also was telling me, why did God love David so much? And then because he says David was an adulterer. He committed adultery, he committed murder, and he was a sinner. We all know about that he committed adultery with Bathsheba and had a husband, Uriah, killed in the battle. But brothers and sisters, but David also had to pay a price for that. The prophet Nathan comes and tells him that God is not pleased with what you have done, and that immediately the child that was to be born dies. The child that was to be born dies from Bathsheba. And many people also say that David had so many wives. Now, coming to that, if you see the history of that period of time in Israel, it was a patriarchal society. And if you see the book of Isaiah, in Isaiah, it says, the women say, he prophesies that the women will say, "I will eat my own bread, I will have my own drink, I will sleep on my own bed. Just give me your name, let my name be attached to yours." So meaning, the women that time would want a man's name to be attached to theirs. So in order to be respected. The women that time, so that is why the man had to have so many wives, because the women wanted man's name to be attached. Unless a man's name was attached to them, they had no respect. So that is why it was a patriarchal society, and that is why they were allowed to have many wives. So Francis is coming to Bathsheba, and then we know the second child born would be King Solomon, and then he would be reigning after David. So David goes through all that, and David is punished, and then we know David is severely punished because of a sin in his own family. His own son Absalom tries to kill him, and he has to run away. Even then he has no peace. In Psalm 31 verses 9 to 24 he writes, he says, "Be merciful to me, O Lord, for I am in distress. My eyes grow weak with sorrow, my soul and body with grief. My life is consumed by anguish, and my years by groaning. My strength fails because of my affliction, and my bones grow weak." So brothers and sisters, far from it that he was anointed a king, and after he was anointed king as just a boy, the prophecy to be fulfilled for David takes many, many years. Instead of being anointed a king, instead of being made a king, it takes so many years that first Saul tries to kill him, then the people are against him, then there's the pressure of the Philistines, they keep on coming to attack the Israelites, and every time David is supposed to be the hero and he's supposed to go and fight, even though God's hand is there with him. But imagine as a human being, every time that you have to, you have that anxiety that anytime you might have to prepare for war and go and fight. And he's expected to win every time, because such is the burden laid upon him by the people of Israel that he's supposed to win every time. And then his own son Absalom tries to kill him, and he runs away. And when he runs away, we all see the heart of David. When one of the descendants of Saul, he curses him and calls him murderer, scoundrel, and whatnot kind of things. And one of the person who's there with David, he says, "Why should you hear his insults? Let me just go and cut off his neck." And this is what David says, brothers and sisters, in 2 Samuel chapter 16, verse 12, he says, "It may be that the Lord will look on my distress, and the Lord will repay me with good for this cursing of me today." So if you see the heart of David, what does he say? He does not allow him to kill his enemy. Instead he says, "It may be that the Lord will look on my distress, and the Lord will repay me with good." So what he expects is that God will do him good instead of if he just takes in all of the bad that man is cursing him. And ultimately we know that David's kingship is restored. He goes back and takes his kingship. But till the end, he had to keep fighting. He had to keep fighting against all kinds of enemies within the kingdom, outside the kingdom. He was always troubled. And God promised him that his son will have a better life, that his son will have freedom from every side. So brothers and sisters, we see the life of King David, full of despair, anguish, and panic, and his life was full of despair and depression. The next person I'd like to talk to you about is the great prophet Elijah. We all know about the great prophet Elijah, one of the few persons who were taken alive to heaven in a flying chariot. As we know, he was taken alive to heaven in a flying chariot. Now, brothers and sisters, the prophet Elijah comes to prominence when we find that the people were full of worshipping the false god called Baal, and they would not listen. And most of them have all turned over from the Lord Yahweh and were worshipping the false god called Baal. And this is a time when the prophet Elijah emerges, because the king Ahab at that point of time of Israel was, he had married a Gentile woman called Jezebel. And this woman Jezebel, she was worshipping Baal. And she had brought in about 450 prophets of this pagan god called Baal. And then, brothers and sisters, Prophet Elijah challenges this 450 prophets of this pagan god Baal, and it tells to them, I will offer an offering to my God, and you offer offering to your God, and whichever God accepts the offering, he is the true God. He tells all the people of Israel, let us all gather together, and if whichever God accepts it, he is the Lord and he is the God. And so the prophets of Baal, they take their bull and they cut it and they offer it, and they call out to Baal. They call out to Baal, and their God does not answer them. They take the whip and they start whipping themselves. They bleed. Still their God does not answer. And then finally Prophet Elijah says, okay, now it's my turn. And it takes 12 stones, marking for each of the tribes of Israel, and takes the 12 stones and makes an altar. And then he cuts the bull and he offers it. And he says to God, Lord, I'm doing this as and how you have commanded me. And he makes a branch, fills it with water, and he calls upon God to accept the oblation, to accept the sacrifice. And God, immediately upon Elijah's calling, accepts the sacrifice, and the people see that and they are stunned and they say, indeed the Lord is God, and they believe it. And then upon God's command, the prophet Elijah puts to death all the 450 prophets of the pagan god Baal. But after that, brothers and sisters, what happens is that Jezebel sends a message to him and saying, if by tomorrow at the same time the same thing has not happened to you, if I do not do the same thing as what you have done to these prophets of Baal, my name is not Jezebel. So immediately fear, depression, anxiety, panic creeps into Elijah. And such a great man, he starts running and he runs away. And in the first book of Kings, chapter 19, verse 4 says, but he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness. He came to a broom bush, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. I have had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors. So, brothers and sisters, here was man Elijah. When he heard his words, he was running away. Now, I heard some years back a preacher saying that Elijah was that he was a coward and he did not trust in God and he was running. But brothers and sisters, it was easy for this preacher to say that because they live in a protected environment and having so many followers and nobody can do anything. But if you see, when God appoints you and God tells you, and God gives you gifts and charisms and tells you, go and do my work, and you say fine, and you do it, and you're doing his work, and you're doing preaching, and then he says accept suffering in your body, you accept pain, and you do it. and even though that pain, there is no medicine. If you go to a doctor, he will only make it worse. Fine. And then God said, then the devil will not allow you to sleep in the nights. You are tormented, and God says, accept it, and you cannot sleep 2-3 nights to the point of almost becoming crazy. And then finally you get sleep, whatever it is. And then all these kind of things, and you say, okay. But then finally people point arrows and spears at you. And then you say, I did not sign up for this. Because every person, human being, has a heart and a mind. And you have feelings and emotions. And Elijah also felt all these things. Easy for you to say all these things when if you live in a gated community and you have you're protected from everything. But as a human being, when you're all by yourself, and then what do? Your emotions will run high, your feelings will run high, your heart's mind will race and will tell you things, and ultimately it's you, and you'll just feel like running away. And that's what Elijah did as a human being, brothers and sisters. He just panicked. Anxiety came into him, grief came into him, despair came into him. He was depressed and he runs away. So brothers and sisters, the next one I'm going to talk about from the Holy Bible is Job. Most of you must be knowing about Job. And Job was a person, as the Holy Bible says, was a holy person, was a God-fearing man, and also a very successful man, a rich man, and always feared God, and did always that was right in the eyes of God. Now this man, as the Holy Bible says, that God was in the heavens, and Satan passes by, and he asks him, where were you? And he says, I went down to the earth. And so God says to him, did you see my servant Job? And did you see how reverent he is to me, and how he worships me, and how he obeys me? And Satan says to him, yes, I've seen all that, but that is all because you have blessed him so much with so many riches and so many good things, and who will not do that? Take away all those things from him, and you see what is his reaction. So God is forced, with the challenge from Satan. God says, okay, I will do that. And God takes away from Job first, he takes away all his wealth, then he takes away his children, and then God inflicts upon him sicknesses and diseases and miseries. And he brings upon so much bad upon him that in the 7th chapter, Job says, he addresses God directly and he says, he pleads to God for relief from his suffering. He describes his days as filled with hopelessness and worthlessness. And brothers and sisters, when you're going through a bad time, what happens? All these friends that you have normally come. And so also Job had friends. He had 3 close friends. And they come to him, and the first one, whose name is Eliphaz, he said to him, think now, who that was innocent ever perished? He says. And the second one, whose name was Bildad, he says, see, God will not reject a blameless person, nor take the hand of an evildoer. And the third one, whose name was Zophar, he says, if iniquity is in your hand, put it far away. Do not let wickedness rest in your tents. So these are what the friends say to him. They suggest, saying that he's an evil person, he's a bad person. Suddenly, from being a good and God-fearing person, when things go bad with you, everyone turns against you and tells you things which are hurting and meaningless and make things even worse. And then Eliphaz again says to him that there is no end to your iniquity. And then he invents some more things, and he says, you have given no water to the weary to drink, and you have withheld bread from the hungry. He says, you have not done any charity in your life. You have not given anything to the poor, the hungry. So they just try to make things up. And so far, he says that the wicked person will not enjoy the riches because God will make their stomachs vomit them up again. So all of them, instead of helping him, his friends, when things go bad, you see how friends turn out. They suggest that he's an evil person, he's an unholy person, he's a wicked person, and all kinds of things they make up and add to his misery. And finally, Job cries out to God in chapter 11, verse 16. He says, therefore I will not keep silent. I will speak out in anguish of my spirit. I will complain in the bitterness of my soul. And he says, I despise my life. I will not live forever. Let me alone. My days have no meaning. Brothers and sisters, the next person I'd like to talk to you about is Naomi from the book of Ruth. We find that this woman Naomi had gone to the land of the Moabites. Now the Moabites were Gentiles, and she was living in this Moabite land along with her husband, and she had 2 sons, and the sons had married the local Moabite women, the Gentile women. And brothers and sisters, tragedy strikes this woman that within a span of 10 years, she loses her husband and both the sons without any heir. And she's alone, far away from Bethlehem, from her extended family, and she's alone in this Gentile, in this alien Moabite land. And she's full of sorrow. And she decides to go back to her native land, back to Israel, back to Bethlehem. And one of her daughter-in-laws, as we know, Ruth, she accompanies her back. And we are told in the first chapter of Ruth, verses 20 to 21, so the 2 women went on until they came to Bethlehem. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them, and the women explained, "Can this be Naomi?" And she said, "Don't call me Naomi," she told them. "Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter." Now, brothers and sisters, the origin of the word Mara comes from the book of Exodus chapter 15. In Exodus chapter 15, we find that the Israelites had crossed the Red Sea, and 3 days after they had crossed the Red Sea, and they were in the wilderness of Shur, and there was no water, and Israelites pick up a quarrel with Moses, and then Moses, they start searching for water, and they find this water body where there is water. But when they taste the water, they find that it is very bitter, and that's how the origin of the word Mara, because the place was known as Mara because the water of the place was bitter, and that is why the place was known as Mara. So we get this origin of the word Mara from Exodus 15. And so, brothers and sisters, we find that Naomi was, her life had become very bitter, and that is what she said, asked the people of Bethlehem to call her Mara. Brothers and sisters, the next person from the Holy Bible I'm going to talk to you about is the great prophet Jeremiah. Now, if we look into the life of prophet Jeremiah, you can put into so many different, he'll probably fall into so many different kinds of mental sicknesses, so many kind of mental problems. You see this prophet Jeremiah, he was just a boy when God calls him. And God tells him, "Before you were formed in your mother's womb, I knew you." And God tells him, when he says to God that I'm just a boy, and he says to God, and God tells him, "Do not say that you're just a boy. I will put my words in your mouth, and you will speak what I will tell you to speak, and you will go and tell whatever I have told you to tell the people." And God puts his hand on his mouth, and then he is supposed to go and prophesy to these people. These people in that time of Israel, it is a very difficult time, brothers and sisters. It was a time when Israel was facing a national crisis. The people had turned their hearts away from God, the true God, Yahweh, and they were worshipping all kinds of false gods. There was a lot of corruption among the leaders, the religious leaders, the king, and God was displeased. And the message that God had, the words that God had put in Jeremiah's mouth were not very pleasant ones. He had to go and condemn the people in the name of the Lord. He had to tell them that what you all are doing is wrong, and that unless you all relent and change, then God will bring destruction upon you all. That a king from far away, from Assyria, will come and take you all into captivity. He will take you all into captivity. He will devastate your land, your crops, your homes, your houses. Everything will be destroyed, and all of you all will be taken into captivity as prisoners into a faraway land. As we know, it was known as the Babylonian exile. And the people reject him and persecute him for this unpopular message. And brothers and sisters, he experiences profound feelings of isolation. And he oftentimes finds himself alone in his convictions with few allies and no supporters. Brothers and sisters, we find at this point of time when Jeremiah gives this unpopular prophecy, there are a lot of false prophets also during that time, like as we have even now today. And in fact, one of this false prophet known as Hananiah, he rebukes him and he goes and breaks the yoke of prophecy which was around the neck of prophet Jeremiah. As you know, during these olden times, the prophets had to wear a yoke, and it would be a wooden kind of a thing which they would wear around their neck, and that would be known as the yoke of prophecy. Of all the prophets had to wear it. And this prophet, false prophet known as Hananiah, he breaks this yoke from his neck because he gives an unpopular message where he condemns people and tells them that God is going to give you all into a hand of a king, very powerful than the king of Israel, and he's going to take you all into a land of captivity. And we find that there was this priest Pashur who strikes him, who beats him, and locks him up in the stocks. The stocks, brothers and sisters, in the olden age, in those times, was something where it was a wooden thing. It was a wooden. It was a wooden kind of a machine where your ankles of the feet and wrists of the hands would be locked. And this priest Pashur, he hits him, he strikes him, and he puts him in the locks. He was ridiculed and mocked by a rebellious mob. The people attacked him. The king threatens him to kill him. And finally, brothers and sisters, eventually he was thrown into a deep, muddy pit. And brothers and sisters, so much so that he goes to so much of torment and so much of trouble because of this unpopular message that he has to go and give out to the people from the Lord. That in the 20th chapter of Jeremiah, verses 14 to 18, the prophet says, "Cursed be the day I was born. May the day my mother bore me not be blessed. Cursed be the man who brought my father the news, who made him very glad, saying, a child is born to you, a son. May that man be like the towns the Lord overthrew without pity. May he hear wailing in the morning, a battle cry at noon. For he did not kill me in the womb, with my mother as my grave. Her womb enlarged forever. Why did I ever come out of the womb to see trouble and sorrow and end to my days?" So, brothers and sisters, this is all how much Jeremiah cries out to God. He says, "Cursed be the day I was born." So you can imagine all that, his anguish and his mental despair that he's going through. And first of all, brothers and sisters, his prophecies eventually come true, and he himself has to witness the devastation of his beloved city and the suffering of his people. He sees the king Nebuchadnezzar, the Assyrian king, the powerful king, coming and destroying the houses, the homes, the lands, everything that the people had grown, the crops, and takes away all the people into captivity with only a few left back. And so, brothers and sisters, in the end, he is left to cry for the land, for his beloved Jerusalem, for beloved Israel. And he cries out to God, and he is left to cry for the people seeing their suffering. And he cries out, and all of this is mentioned and recorded in the next book known as the Book of Lamentations. So, brothers and sisters, he writes another book known as the Book of Lamentations, and that is also included in the Holy Bible. So, brothers and sisters, here's this man. First he has to cry. He goes and complains to God about his people not listening to him and fighting him and putting him in so much of trouble and trying to kill him. And then again, in the end, he is left to cry out for his people, cry out for his beloved land. So here's, brothers and sisters, you see the life of Prophet Jeremiah. The next, brothers and sisters, the next person I'm going to talk to you about is one of the great liberator and lawgiver. The person who we see in the Transfiguration along with Prophet Elijah. Yes, brothers and sisters, the great Moses, our lawgiver. So, brothers and sisters, here was this man Moses who sees God face to face, and he had so much of closeness to God. But, brothers and sisters, he was faced with profound internal emotional struggles despite his deep closeness with God. Tasked with leading the Israelites out of bondage in Egypt and to the promised land, Moses bore the weight of their responsibility. His journey was fraught with trials and challenges, right from the time he had to confront Pharaoh to the hardened hearts of the people who would not change and listen to God, despite of so many miracles that God performs in their sight. Brothers and sisters, the life of Moses, as we know, starts off in the book of Exodus, in the first very chapter. We are told that Pharaoh, the king at that time, pharaohs as they were known, was concerned with the Hebrews' population multiplying in Egypt. And he was not very pleased. And he was not very pleased to see that so many able young men of the Hebrews, that they were very strong and that they were multiplying. And he had a fear that at some point in time, that the Hebrews might overtake the Egyptians and that they might begin to own the land. So he comes out with this plan and calls the Hebrew midwives, and he tells them, whenever you are to do a delivery of the Hebrews, of the Israelites that is, he says, if it is a girl you shall keep it, and if it is a boy you shall kill them. But the midwives, fearing God, they did not do it. So the Pharaoh summons them and he asks them, why did you not obey my orders? And they tell him that the Hebrew women are very strong, and before we arrive, they have already given birth. Whereas the Egyptian women are weak and they require us midwives to help them to give birth. So then the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, he devises another scheme and he comes out with an order and he says that if a Hebrew woman gives birth, if it is a girl, she shall be kept alive, and if it is a boy, he shall be killed. No Hebrew child, male child, shall be allowed to live. So this order is passed, and at that time we have the scenario where a Levite man marries a Levite woman, and they have this child, and the woman, she hides the child. And when she cannot hide it anymore and he's about 3 months old, she makes a basket of papyrus, puts some bitumen underneath, and she leaves the child in the basket among the reeds on the river Nile. And she gives one of her daughter. She gives her daughter to see what happens to the child. So after a while, the princess, the daughter of the Pharaoh, she comes and she sees the child in the papyrus basket. And she understands that it is a Hebrew child, since the child was a boy and they were not allowed to keep the boy child. And she feels pity for him. She feels pity for him and she decides to take him to his home. And that very moment of time, the sister of Moses was kept by her mother to see what happens to Moses, the child. So she goes and asks him, do you need a Hebrew woman to nurse the child and to raise it? And she said yes, and she goes and brings back her mother, who is the own mother of Moses. So the child is given to his mother, and when he's old, he's given back. Now the princess is the one, the Pharaoh's daughter is the one who gives the name Moses to Moses. She names him Moses because she says, I drew him out of the water. So the meaning of Moses is, I drew him out of the water. So, brothers and sisters, once Moses grows up, he realizes that he's a Hebrew, he's not an Egyptian. And when he sees that there are Egyptian and a Hebrew are fighting, he takes the side of the Hebrew and he kills the Egyptian. And then when he hears that the Pharaoh is trying to kill him, he runs away. And he runs away and he hides in the land of Midian. And that is where he meets his wife. He marries the daughter of the priest of Midian, Jethro, and his wife is known as Zipporah. And brothers and sisters, as you know, at the southern part of Egypt, most of the people living there used to be black. So his wife was a Kashite, and Kashites were blacks. So his wife was black. For those of you who don't know. So brothers and sisters, and then we have in the 4th chapter, we have the encounter of Moses with God. Where Moses sees the burning bush. This is a burning bush. And he is astounded to see that the bush is burning, but it is not consumed by the fire. So he draws closer to him. And then he hears a voice speaking to him, and he says, and it's a voice of God, and he says, do not come no closer, and remove the sandals on your feet, because the ground which you are standing is holy. And then he comes closer, and God starts speaking to him, and he says, I have heard the cries of my people, the Israelites, how they are tormented and how they are troubled by the Pharaoh in Egypt. And I wish to liberate them, I wish to set them free, and I have chosen you. And brothers and sisters, Moses asks him, who are you, God? And he says, if the people ask me and ask me who has sent you and what is your name? And he said, God tells him, I am who I am. And brothers and sisters, further on in the 4th chapter, we find that in the 4th chapter, we find that Moses tells God about his inadequacies. He tells God, I am slow of speech and slow of tongue. In other words, Moses had a speech impediment. He used to stammer. He could not speak clearly. And God tells him, then I will make your brother Aaron to speak to the people. So Aaron shall play the prophet, and Moses shall play God to the people. And brothers and sisters, then we see that through great signs and wonders, through the stuff, God sets the people Israelites free from the land of Egypt, and they are taken out from the land of Egypt by the parting of the Red Sea, and they go to the wilderness. We all know that they traveled 40 years to the desert, 40 long years. And brothers and sisters, during this 40 long years, the Israelites multiply. They multiply, and there are so many people. And for any small thing, they would come and quarrel with Moses. They would quarrel with Moses, and other than that, he had to deal with so many problems regarding their food, their water. Then there were fights amongst them. So, brothers, the burden on Moses was so much. The burden on Moses was so much that in Numbers chapter 11, verse 15, he says to God, I cannot carry all these people by myself. The burden is too heavy for me. If this is how you are going to treat me, please go ahead and kill me if I have found favor in your eyes, and do not let me face my own ruin. So, brothers and sisters, the burden of the people, their constant complaining, their nagging, and the constant search for food, for water, and then there would be this so many different kind of people that they would have to fight when they would cross. Of course, God would always be with them and help them. We know that when they had to fight the Amalekites, and Moses had to lift his hands up, and whenever Moses' hands were down, the enemies would prevail, and Moses had to keep his hands up right from dawn till sundown. And when his hand grew tired, then 2 stones were put under his hands, and so that his hands would remain up, and then the Israelites would prevail. So Moses has to go through so much, brothers and sisters, so that in order to make sure that the Israelites reach the promised land. And to make matters worse, there were people jealous of him, even his own brother and sister. As I told you, that at the time when Moses was left in the river Nile, there was his sister who was kept to see over him. So his sister was Miriam, and he also had an elder brother. Elder brother was Aaron. So we find in Numbers chapter 12 that Aaron and Miriam are jealous of Moses, and they start speaking against him, and they say, is Moses the only one that has seen God? Have we not seen God? Have we not spoken to God? And when God hears this, God is not pleased, because Numbers chapter 12 tells us that God was very pleased with Moses, because Moses was a very humble person, a very down-to-earth person. So much so that at that point of time, there was no one more humbler than Moses on the whole earth. So, brothers and sisters, then God calls out Moses, Aaron, and Miriam out of the tent. And God says to Aaron and Miriam, He says to them, with all my prophets I speak with dreams and in visions, but not so with Moses. He says, with Moses I speak to him face to face. And he says to them, how then did you dare, O master of the courage, to level allegations against Moses? And then God strikes Miriam. He strikes Miriam, and her whole skin is turned leprous. She contracts leprosy from the head to the toe, we are told. And immediately Aaron pleads before Moses and tells him, my Lord, we are foolish to speak against you, and please intercede for us, and please ask God to heal Miriam. And Moses goes down on his knees and prays to God and asks God for forgiveness, and God tells him to put Miriam out of the tent for 7 days. So Miriam is put out for the tent for 7 days until she is cleansed of her leprosy. And at that time, the entire Israelites have to hold on to their journey. And now once she is cleansed of her leprosy and she is brought back, and then they continue on with their journey. So, brothers and sisters, you see that even his brother and his sister were jealous of him. And so many problems he had to face. So much of that, brothers and sisters, in Numbers chapter 20, we find that the Israelites are again in the wilderness of Zin. They're in the wilderness of Zin, and they do not have water. And the people pick up a quarrel with Moses and Aaron, and they say, why have you brought the congregation of God out here in the desert to die? They say, there is no grain over here, there is no grain, there are no figs, there is no grapevines, there are no pomegranates. There are not even water for us and our livestock. And they quarrel, and Moses and Aaron immediately go into the tent, at the entrance of the tent of the meeting, and they call upon God, and the glory of God stands upon Moses, and God tells Moses, you go tomorrow in Meribah, and you command the rock to pour out water. And brothers and sisters, Moses goes the next day with the people, and he says to them, listen, you rebels, shall we bring water for you out of the rock? He says, shall we bring water out for you from the rock? And he strikes the rock. He strikes the rock with the staff twice. Now God had told him only to command the rock and not to strike the rock. But not only does he strike the rock, but he strikes it twice. Now maybe because of the pressure of the people all upon his neck, and maybe with that anger, but brothers and sisters, Moses makes his mistake, and so much so that God is angry with him and Aaron, and tells them that you have not obeyed me, and you have not fulfilled my command. And that is why he says, both of you shall not be able to see the promised land. And in fact, we find in the same chapter, in the 20th chapter in the Numbers chapter, 20th chapter, we find that Aaron dies and is buried, and his vestments are removed, as God commands Moses to remove the vestments of Aaron, and his vestments are given to his eldest son Eleazar, who is then made the high priest. So, brothers and sisters, now coming to this, the waters of Meribah, where Moses disobeys God. Now, brothers and sisters, if you go to the 17th chapter of Exodus, we find that a similar kind of situation where the Israelites are in the wilderness of Sin. They're in the wilderness of Sin, and they do not have water, and they go and complain to Moses. They pick up a quarrel as usual with Moses. And Moses tells the Lord, and God tells him that he go out to Horeb in front of the rock, and I will be there. And you tap on the rock with your staff, and water shall flow out. And Moses does that. Now, brothers and sisters, we don't know in Numbers 20 what happens to Moses. Perhaps because with all that stress and with all that anxiety, perhaps he strikes the rock with the staff twice, and thus losing favor with God. And finally, brothers and sisters, through everything and continuing with the journey, finally we find, and then we have the book of law that Moses gives us in Deuteronomy. And then, brothers and sisters, we find that Moses' journey comes to an end in Deuteronomy chapter 20, where God shows him the promised land. He says, you shall not go there, you shall not cross over to the promised land because of your disobedience to me. But I shall show you the promised land from you. And God shows him entire Canaan, Jericho, and the entire land. And brothers and sisters, Moses dies there at the age of 120. And when Moses died at the age of 120, he was still strong. He was not an old person or weak person. He was agile mentally. He was physically strong. He was fit. So Moses dies, brothers and sisters, at the age of 120. And every time, brothers and sisters, that I read the life of Moses, right from, starts from Exodus to the 20th chapter of Numbers, I feel like crying reading the life of this great man of God, Moses. What a life he went through. Giving up on his wife, his children, and so many things. We don't know what kind of ambitions that he might have had. If he wanted, he could have been a prince. He could have been someone great in the house of Pharaoh. He could have lived a royal life. But he chose to be a Hebrew, to be an Israelite and stand up for his fellow Israelite and kill one of the Egyptians and flee to Midian, and that's where God chooses him. So we see that God chooses him, but once God chooses him again, his life is not easy. His life is full of hardships and difficulties, even though he sees God face to face, because he has this awesome burden of carrying, overwhelming burden of carrying all of God's holy chosen people into the promised land. It's not easy because God's holy, so-called God's holy chosen people are not so holy after all, because they are stiff-necked, they are stone-hearted, and they refuse to obey. And thus he sins against God, he disobeys God. Now, brothers and sisters, while all these biblical figures which I have mentioned eventually find hope and redemption in God, it is apparent that all of them suffer from deep despair, depression and hopelessness at one point or another. So why must faithful servants of God suffer? Brothers and sisters, in the book of Genesis, Satan introduced the concept of sin, of suffering, the concept of suffering into the world through the original sin. Satan, in the form of serpent, tempts Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden to disobey God's commandments, not to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Through this disbelief and act of disobedience, Adam and Eve's sin brought the consequences for all of us, humankind. Where we were banished out from the Garden of Eden, out into this world, to toil and to earn our daily bread. Now, brothers and sisters, there are many people now, this modern theologists, New Age theologists, they say, Jesus died on the cross and everything is forgiven, everything is finished, and there is no sin left, there is no debt to pay. And there is nothing called ancestral curses and bondages. Brothers and sisters, if we see our lives, the moment we are born, whenever there is we take a expectant mother to the hospital, and the expectant mother is inside the operating room, and all the relatives, maybe the father-to-be and the uncles, aunties, grandparents, and everyone is waiting outside, and we hear the child cry, and then everyone is happy. But brothers and sisters, it is attributed that one of the reasons why the child cries is because it's the soul of the child which cries, and because it comes into the world and it knows that it has to go through all ups and downs in life and all difficulties in life. And many of us maybe have more ups and downs, but some of us have it level. Maybe some part of our life is difficult, some part of our life is easy. But there are many of us just struggling and suffering. And it all comes down to nothing but ancestral curses and bondages. No matter what someone tells you and what someone preaches and teaches, but you know what you are going through and what all you have done and what you have suffered and what sins you have committed and why you are going through. And despite of everything, nothing seems to make sense to you of what you are going through. And brothers and sisters, it is all because of the sins of your parents, grandparents, grandparents. Because in the book of law, in Deuteronomy chapter 5 verse 9, God clearly says, I am the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing children for the iniquity of parents, to the third and fourth generations of those who reject me. So God clearly tells you here that He will punish children for the sin of their parents. And furthermore, why some of us might be not having such difficulties in our life, He says, but showing steadfast love to the 1,000th generation of those who love me and keep my commandments. So brothers and sisters, it is flawed to say that there is no ancestral curse and bondage. And only the person who goes through this ancestral curse and bondage and suffers through their life, only they can feel and they can understand what it really means, and not many of these new age theologians who just seem to focus and trumpet their own side of the things without even knowing what the others are feeling. Now, brothers and sisters, when they say that, some of them will say that this law in the Old Testament is not applicable now, that Jesus suffered and died and everything is finished, it is over. But Jesus says and tells us in the Gospel of Matthew, in the New Testament, in the Gospel of Matthew chapter 5 verse 7, Jesus says, do not think I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish but to fulfill. So Jesus says, I have not come to abolish but to fulfill. Jesus clearly says, for those people who think that the Old Testament has no relevance, Jesus says, it is completely important, and if we read the Gospel, we see that when Jesus was here on this earth, when He was a child, when He was lost in the temple, He was reading the scrolls. He was reading the scrolls of Isaiah, He was reading all the scrolls of the Old Testament, the law, the book, and the prophets, everything He was going through. And brothers and sisters, it does not mean that if we are going through this kind of difficulties and hardships or suffering and curses and bondages, then everything is over. No, brothers and sisters. In the Gospel of Luke, chapter 22, verse 44, and Luke is the only Gospel writer who mentions this. Matthew, Mark, and John do not write this. So Luke in chapter 22, verse 44 says, in his anguish he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down on the ground. So brothers and sisters, Jesus calls us and teaches us that in your great anguish, pray hard. Pray unceasingly. That is our only way, not to waver, not to go away from God, not to go to false places of worship and try to think that all this will end. No, brothers and sisters, the only way is to remain loyal, to cling to the cross of Christ, to cling to Jesus. That is the only way, and to pray earnestly, because God will make a way through all these difficulties. Because after all, in the chapter 19 of John, verse 30, He says, it is finished. Through His suffering, it is finished. And one day, for all of us, God who does not wish to see us suffer for long, He also will say for us, it is finished. And He will say, come, welcome my child, into my heavenly kingdom. Come, sit next to me on my throne. Come, welcome into paradise. For Jesus says, broad and easy is the path that leads to eternal damnation, but narrow and thorny is the path that leads to eternal salvation. And brothers and sisters, for all of us who become like Jesus, Christ, who follow Him, not just by saying, I'm a Christian, my religion is Christian, I'm a Catholic, and so, only in words, and go for Mass and say the Rosary, but in our hearts and minds we are far away. We only do it so that everything goes well with us. Not those kind of Christians, but we follow but we are the followers when Jesus says, if you wish to be my disciple, lift up your cross and follow me. And then, brothers and sisters, Jesus promises us in the book of Apocalypse, and Revelation chapter 3, verse 12, he says, if you conquer, I will make you a pillar in the temple of my God. So Jesus tells us, if you conquer, I will make you a pillar in the temple of my God. Furthermore, he says, you will never go out of it. I will write on you the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, the new Jerusalem that comes down from my God out of heaven, and my own new name. Amen, amen,